The sky turned red as the ships came down from space, and the people of Earth looked up in fear as the stars vanished behind metal and fire, and no one understood what was happening until it was already too late, and the first blasts fell from the sky like angry thunder. They called themselves the Varn, and they were not just one race, but many, and they came together to take Earth, because they saw humans as weak and broken and full of fear, and they believed it would be easy to conquer a world that was always at war with itself and always busy fighting over small things, while the real danger was already on its way. The first cities to fall were the ones with the tallest towers and the biggest lights, and in only a few hours, they became nothing but ash and rubble and silence, and the screams of those who tried to run filled the air like smoke, and the oceans turned black with the remains of machines, and the broken hopes of people who once dreamed of stars, but now only dreamed of survival. The armies of Earth tried to fight, but their weapons were like sticks and stones against the power of the Varn, and the skies were filled with drones and beams and shadows that moved faster than anything human eyes had ever seen, and the Varn laughed as they marched across the land and crushed all who stood in their way. Governments fell one by one, and leaders begged for mercy, and the people were told to surrender or die, and those who gave up were taken away in ships or locked in camps made of fire and metal, and those who refused were left behind to become part of the dust and the silence that followed. The Varn believed they had won, and they held a great celebration in the sky with lights and music, and words spoken in strange alien tongues, and they declared Earth to be theirs by right of strength, and they said that humans would now serve a greater cause, and become workers and tools and pets for the glory of the stars. But in the middle of all their joy and pride, they did not see the eyes that still burned with fire in the shadows, or the fists that still held broken tools as weapons, or the minds that still planned even in chains, because not all humans gave up, and not all humans were afraid, and deep in the ruins, something began to move. A child hid beneath a fallen wall, and watched the sky burn, and did not cry, and did not scream, and instead remembered every face lost, and every promise broken, and something cold and sharp began to grow in that child's heart, and far away a soldier, who had lost everything, picked up a piece of glass, and swore a silent oath, and an old woman whispered a story in the dark to others, who listened with wide eyes and steady hands. The Varn thought humans were simple and soft and easy to control, but they did not understand what Earth really was, or what kind of creatures had been born from war and ice and hunger and pain, and they did not know that every time a human falls another one rises and remembers. They called humans animals and tools and beasts of burden, but they did not look deep enough to see the rage and the memory and the fire that sleeps behind human eyes, and they did not ask what humans become when they have nothing left to lose and nothing left to fear. They did not see the signs in the dark places where old maps were burned and new paths were drawn, or the secret words passed between hands under the watch of alien eyes, or the sharp stones buried in fields where crops once grew, or the quiet hum of old machines waking up again in forgotten tunnels. To the Varn it was a victory and nothing more, and they told stories to each other of how easy it was, and how soft Earth had been, and how the humans had bowed without a fight. But those stories were lies, and they did not know it yet, but those lies would become the seeds of their own fall. Because in every shadow there was still movement, and in every silence there was still breath, and in every broken city there was still a heart that beat, and in every cage there was still a soul that refused to die. The Varn came with fire and chains, and thought they had crushed a world, but they did not crush the human spirit, and they did not break the human will, and they did not end the story. They only started it. The sky never turned blue again after the Varn came, and Earth no longer felt like home to those who once called it theirs, and the stars above now watched with silence, as the world lived under new masters, who spoke in strange voices, and looked down on everything human, as if it was dust beneath their feet. The cities were no longer cities, but zones, and each zone belonged to a different alien race from the Varn Alliance, and each race had its own way of ruling and controlling and punishing, and the humans inside these zones were treated not as people, but as things that moved and breathed and bled and obeyed without question. In the northern zone, the Call used humans to dig deep into the ground to search for rare stones that powered their machines, and the people there worked in endless darkness, with no rest and no warmth, and the air was filled with dust that choked the lungs and burned the skin, and every day a voice from above told them to work harder or vanish like the ones who came before them. In the southern zone, the Vrel turned old cities into farms and used human hands to feed their growing armies, and anyone who dropped a tool or looked up at the sky was taken away to a place from which no one ever returned, and still the people kept planting and digging and whispering stories to each other when the guards were not listening. In the western zone, the Yuriks used humans for sport and made them run and fight and crawl for their entertainment, and those who refused were broken slowly, and those who fought well were broken faster, and every scream was music to alien ears, and every drop of blood was a victory in a game where only one side ever won. But even in this nightmare, the humans began to change in ways the Varn did not notice or understand, and in quiet moments, when the aliens turned their backs, people began to remember what it meant to be more than just bodies that move and follow and suffer. In one labor camp, a boy wrote words in the dirt with a stick, and other children watched and learned and remembered, and they passed these words on like fire from one hand to another, and soon the guards noticed that the people were looking up again, and not just down. In another zone, a woman hummed an old song as she worked, and her voice traveled across the fields, and others began to hum too, and the melody carried a feeling the Varn could not name, but they felt it in their bones, and it made them uneasy. And one commander ordered the singing to stop forever, but the next day the song returned louder and stronger. In the ruins of an old university, a man who once taught history told secret stories to those who would listen, and these stories were not of alien worlds or lost stars, but of Earth itself, of ancient battles and impossible victories, and the strength that lies hidden in those who refuse to be forgotten. One night in the central zone, where the Varn High Council had built their great tower to watch over their new world, something strange happened, and all the lights in the tower blinked, once, then twice, then went out, and for 5 long minutes the tower stood in darkness and silence, and the aliens inside whispered to each other in fear, and asked what could do such a thing, but no answer came, and then the lights came back, as if nothing had happened, but the fear did not leave their hearts. They sent more guards to every zone, and placed eyes in the sky and ears in the walls, and they told themselves it was only a mistake, a power failure, a glitch in the system. But deep down, they felt something growing, something moving in the shadows, something watching and waiting and listening. In one quiet place far from the zones, where few dared to go, a group of humans gathered around a fire, and spoke no words, and shared no names, and only passed around a piece of old cloth, with a single mark burned into it, a symbol that once stood for hope, and now stood for war. The Varn believed humans had no future and no strength left and no reason to rise again, and so they did not fear small things like cloth or songs or stories. But these small things were seeds, and these seeds took root in every heart that had not yet given up. The aliens saw humans as weak because they cried and remembered and held each other close in the cold, but they did not know that in those tears there was steel, and in those memories there was fire, and in every embrace there was a promise to never stop fighting, even if the fight had to begin with bare hands and broken tools. They did not understand that humans do not forget, and they do not forgive, and they do not stay quiet forever. One young guard from the Vrel began to notice that his human workers no longer looked away when he passed, and one day he caught a boy staring right into his eyes with no fear and no hate, only silence, and something behind that silence that felt old and deep and powerful, and the guard turned away and did not speak of it again. One scientist among the Yuriks noticed a strange pattern in the reports from the camps, and it seemed that humans were surviving injuries they should not survive, and healing faster than expected, and he tried to bring it up in a meeting, but was laughed at and told that humans were too weak to change. But change was already happening, and no one could stop it. Every beating heart beneath the ruins and ashes of Earth carried something, now something quiet and strong and steady, like the sound of thunder before the storm. The aliens had taken Earth with fire and power, but they had not killed what made humans human, and they had not crushed what lived in the soul of every person who still dared to hope, even in chains. And though they ruled from their towers and watched from their ships and called themselves masters of this broken world, they could not see the truth rising right beneath their feet. The humans were not done. They were only waiting. And soon, the waiting would end. It began with whispers in the dark places where no cameras watched and no alien boots stepped, and where only broken walls and fallen stones kept silent company to those who still breathed and still remembered. The whispers were not loud, and they did not speak of war or freedom or revenge at first, but of names and faces and moments before the sky burned, and before the stars rained fire, and before the world changed forever, and people spoke of what they had lost and who they used to be. And in those soft words something old began to stir, like smoke rising from dying embers. In a deep cave hidden below what once was a city, a man with silver hair and scars across his arms sat in the center of a ring of people, and his voice was not strong but steady, and each word carried the weight of years. And he spoke of the past, of wars fought on mountains and seas, of machines built not to destroy but to explore, and of moments when humans stood at the edge and chose to rise instead of fall. Children sat with wide eyes and listened, and even the old ones who had given up now leaned in closer. And in that dark place the story became more than memory, it became a spark, and the spark began to move from heart to heart, like fire searching for dry wood. Far away in the eastern zone, a young girl with bruises on her arms and dust in her hair stood at the edge of a pit where she was told to dig each day, and watched as the alien guards talked and laughed and turned their backs, and she looked down at her hands and saw not weakness, but calluses and strength, and she began to understand that the pain had shaped her and not broken her, and that there was something in her that had grown stronger every time she had been pushed down. She did not speak, but that night she carved a mark into the wall of her shelter, a mark that had no meaning to the Varn, but to her it meant, I am still here, and I have not forgotten, and I will not stay quiet. And when others saw it, they began to add their own marks, and soon the wall became a message written in silence. The Varn did not notice, not yet, and they kept laughing and shouting orders, and believing their control was unshaken, but beneath their feet the ground had already started to shift, and in their skies something unseen had begun to watch back. A young alien guard named Kellex served in a high observation tower built over the southern farms, and his job was simple: to report anything strange or out of place. But for many days there was nothing but quiet and obedience, and the sound of machines and wind, and he grew bored and careless, until one night he saw movement far beyond the lights, a figure moving fast between the rows of crops, with no fear of the patrols or the drones. He blinked and tried to focus, and saw the figure vanish behind a hill, and when he reported it, his commander laughed, and said it was a shadow or a trick of the night wind, and told him not to waste time on ghost stories. But Kellex could not forget the way the figure moved, not like a frightened worker, but like a hunter, and he began to feel something he had never felt before, something cold and sharp and very human. Elsewhere, deep in a flooded subway tunnel that no longer held trains, only rats and broken wires, a group of humans found an old machine still covered in rust and dust, but still warm and humming quietly, and one of them, who had once worked with wires and circuits in another life before the war, touched the panel, and the machine opened its eye and blinked and spoke a word in a dead language, and the people around it stared with wonder, because they had not heard a human voice from a machine in years. They carried the machine piece by piece to a safer place, and began to feed it power from stolen cells, and the machine remembered more with each hour, and told them things they had forgotten: how to build, how to defend, how to survive. It told them about old satellites still drifting in orbit and used, but listening, and about hidden bunkers, once filled with tools and food and medicine, and it gave them hope and purpose and a plan. The Varn still believed they had ended the story of Earth, but they had only silenced one chapter, and now the next chapter was being written by hands that knew suffering and hearts that refused to surrender. The change was not just in spirit, but in body, and slowly, without knowing it, the humans began to adapt to their new world, and their new pain, and their new silence, and those who had lived through the worst became faster and stronger and harder to break. A young man who had survived 5 years in the mountain mines without a break began to climb walls with bare hands and leap across wide gaps as if gravity no longer held him like before, and a woman who had spent every night running from patrols began to hear footsteps from far away and could vanish before anyone saw her, and a child who never spoke suddenly began to understand the alien tongue without being taught. The Varn called these things luck or myth or malfunction, but fear had begun to grow behind their golden eyes, and in their long halls they whispered of humans becoming something else, something dangerous, something no longer bound by the rules of before. They did not know how to stop it, and so they tried to pretend it was not real, and they increased the patrols, and built new fences, and sent hunters into the dark. But every time they caught someone, another rose in their place, and every time they silenced a whisper, another voice began to speak. The old man in the cave now told stories of legends not from earth, but of the stars, of beings who changed and rose from chains to kings. And he looked into the fire and said that maybe the Varn were not the rulers. They thought they were, but only the test before the storm. And in every zone and every camp and every ruin, the people began to dream again, not of peace or safety or comfort, but of something older and deeper and more powerful. They dreamed of what it meant to awaken. They dreamed of what it meant to become. They dreamed of what it meant to be human. The wind was cold over the northern ridge, where the mining field stretched for miles, and machines groaned as they pulled stone from the earth, and human workers moved like shadows beneath heavy lights and silent drones, and everything seemed normal until the morning the mountain screamed. It came like thunder from inside the rock, not from above, but from deep below, and the guards ran toward the sound with weapons ready and eyes sharp. But when they reached the edge of Shaft 7, they saw only blackness and smoke and fire where the tunnel had been. No bodies were found, not one human, not one tool, only scorched stone and twisted metal, and the marks of claws deep and sharp, like nothing the Varn had ever seen. And the commander ordered the area sealed, and said it was a cave-in, and nothing more. But the soldiers did not believe it, and neither did the humans. Whispers spread like wind through the camps, not of death or fear, but of escape and freedom. And the ones who had vanished were now called the first to rise, the first to strike back, the first to show the Varn what humans could become. Far away in the eastern zone, a patrol outpost went silent for 3 nights, and when a drone was sent to check, only broken walls and melted armor remained, and one wall was marked with a single handprint burned into the stone with heat that made no sense and no logic. The Varn Council gathered in orbit and watched the reports and argued in many tongues and many tones, and most said it was sabotage and trickery, but one spoke of something darker, something older, and he warned them that Earth was changing beneath their feet, and that humans were not what they used to be. But they did not listen. In the western ruins of a fallen city, a Varn supply convoy moved slowly through the dead streets and towers, and the guards laughed as they passed graffiti and broken machines, and they pointed their rifles at shadows and joked that nothing in this place could hurt them. They did not see the eyes watching from above and from below, and when the trap came, it came without sound and without mercy, and the convoy vanished into smoke and silence, and only one drone survived long enough to send back an image. It was a figure standing over the wreckage, holding nothing, wearing nothing, face hidden in shadow, and behind it others moved like wind through ash, and then the feed ended. The Varn called them ghosts and monsters and impossible, but still the attacks grew more bold, more sharp, more smart, and the humans behind them left no names, no flags, no messages, only damage and silence. In one camp, a young alien guard named Ferric noticed something strange. The human workers no longer looked broken or tired. They moved with rhythm and purpose, and even when beaten they stood back up faster than before, and their eyes no longer held fear. One night Ferric followed a worker back to his shelter and watched from the shadows as the man drew symbols in the dirt and whispered in an old tongue, and behind him others joined in, and they moved as one, breathing together like a single body with one soul. And Ferric felt something cold in his chest and ran back to his station without a word. The next day that shelter was empty, and every trace of people inside was gone, and Ferric did not speak of it again. In the central tower, the Varn high leaders ordered more drones, more fences, more weapons, but even the machines began to fail and break without reason, and no one could explain how signals were lost or why cameras showed only static during the attacks. They built firewalls and used the strongest minds of their species to hunt the source, but the source was not in code or light or metal. It was in blood and memory and pain, and every human born under the smoke-filled sky now carried something the Varn could not name and could not fight. One small girl, only 7 years old, lifted a fallen beam with her bare hands to save her brother, and the alien watching her froze and whispered a prayer to his gods before turning away, because what he saw was not weakness, but something raw and strong and wrong in a way he could not understand. The retaliation came not as war, but as a storm in pieces, small and fast and wild, and the Varn did not know how to stop it, because it did not come from armies or machines. It came from the spirit of a people who had learned to survive in silence and who now chose to rise in shadows. In a hidden bunker beneath a broken museum, a council of humans gathered from different zones, different camps, different ruins, and they spoke not of fear, but of timing and skill and silence, and they planned not to win but to last and strike and vanish and strike again. They had no leader, no flag, no anthem, only a shared truth carved into every soul that had seen the sky burn and lived, and that truth was simple: we are not broken, we are not done, we are not yours. Above them the Varn ships hovered like gods in the clouds, and their soldiers marched like steel across the earth, but the ground beneath them had teeth now, and the wind carried more than dust, and the night was no longer quiet. The retaliation was not an army, it was a memory with fists and claws and teeth, and it moved through the world like a question the Varn could not answer. Why did we think they would stay down? Why did we believe they would not change? Why did we come here thinking we understood them? In the silence between attacks, the Varn began to feel something new and strange in their hearts, and it was not hate or anger or confusion, it was fear, and they did not know how to name it, because they had never feared prey before. But the prey had changed, and it was hunting now. It started with one breath in the cold morning air of Zone 9, where the frost never melted, and the sun never rose above the smoke and ash, and the people worked without rest, digging through ice and steel to find what the Varn demanded, and none of them ever saw the stars. One man lifted a stone twice his size and carried it up the ridge without stopping, and the other workers watched in silence and did not speak, because strength like that was not normal, not human, not possible, but there it was before their eyes, and none of the guards could explain it. The man did not speak either, and no one knew his name, only that he had come from the south with burns on his back and eyes that looked through walls and fire, and his hands never shook even in the cold, and when he walked others stepped aside, without knowing why. In another zone, a girl no older than 10 ran through a field of sensors and drones, and never triggered one, and the guards thought she must have vanished, but she appeared again outside the fence carrying food for her brother, and no one could understand how she moved like smoke through metal and code. A doctor among the Varn began to notice the changes, not just in strength or speed, but in blood and bone and brain, and he ran tests in secret on samples taken from wounded humans, and what he saw made him shake with something colder than fear, and he locked the reports away and told no one, because the truth was too big and too strange. The human body was changing, and not in small ways, but in deep silent ways that touched every part of it, and the change came not from machines or science, but from pain and fire and survival and something ancient waking up from sleep. The Varn had seen many species over the stars, and many kinds of life and strength and knowledge, but they had never seen this, never seen a prey creature grow stronger in chains, never seen slaves evolve without help, never seen broken things heal into weapons. The humans did not roar or shout or rise with banners. They changed in silence, in darkness, under pressure, like coal turning to diamond, without sound, without warning. A woman in the mountain zone stood in front of a transport truck, moving at full speed, and the truck stopped not because she moved, but because the ground cracked beneath her feet, and the wheels melted from heat that came from nowhere, and when the guards came they found only her footprints burned into the stone, and her scent gone with the wind. Children who had never seen sunlight began to draw maps of places they had never visited, and speak words in languages long dead, and the elders began to listen and nod, because something old had returned to their voices, something lost before the fall. A team of Varn scientists argued in a closed room above the central tower, and each one had a theory, but no one had proof, and the facts lay before them in broken sensors and failed tests, and the question hung in the air like smoke. What are they becoming? What are we fighting? The answers did not come, and outside the tower a human climbed a wall taller than 10 men, without rope or sound, and left behind only a message written in the blood of his hand: "We are awake." The Varn sent their best hunters into the wild zones, and told them to bring back proof, to crush the myth of the new humans, but the hunters never returned, and the only thing found was a video feed cut short by a whisper in an old Earth tongue run. In the deep forest where machines could not fly and signals could not reach, a woman stood at the center of a circle, and the people around her listened with heads bowed as she spoke of change and growth and fire, and she named no gods and no kings, only the truth of becoming. She told them the change was not magic, and not gift, but cost and pain, and price paid in tears and blood, and that those who walked this path would never be the same, and never be soft again, and none of them turned away. They trained with what they had: stones and fire and silence, and every breath they took made them stronger, and every scar they carried told a story not of loss, but of rising, and those stories became the songs of the new breed. They no longer needed machines because their bodies had become weapons, and they no longer needed leaders because their minds worked as one, and they no longer feared pain because pain had made them. The Varn called them rebels and monsters and ghosts, and sent more ships, more troops, more fire, but every time they struck the humans, scattered like ash, and returned like wind, and the Varn grew tired and afraid, and began to wonder if they were still the ones in control. In a cold lab far from Earth, a Varn elder played a recording over and over, a voice speaking in low even words: "We are not who we were, and we are not who you thought, and if you do not leave now you will never leave again." And the elder turned off the sound, and closed his eyes, and said a prayer in a language that had not been spoken in 200 years. The prayer was not for victory, but for survival, because he knew what the others still denied, that the humans had changed, that the fire they thought they had tamed now burned without end, and that soon no wall, no sky, no ship would be far enough to run. The new breed did not march in the open, or raise a flag, or sing an anthem. They moved in silence, in unity, in rage shaped by love for those they lost, and hate for those who took, and a promise that echoed in every heart: "We will not kneel again." And now the galaxy watched from the dark corners, where power hides, and wondered what would come next, because something new had been born in the ashes of Earth, not a child, not a weapon, but a force that could not be named, and could not be undone. And it was human, and it was coming. The silence before the storm came first, not in the sky or in the air, but in the systems of the Varn ships that hovered above Earth, like steel gods watching a broken world, and waiting for the last breath of resistance to fade into dust. The silence spread across the orbiting fleet, one ship at a time. Monitors blinked, lights dimmed, voices stuttered, and then fell to nothing, and each captain called for answers, but none came, and all they could hear was static, followed by a single line whispered in the human tongue: "We are still here." In the city still held by the Varn towers trembled under the feet of machines that once ruled with ease, now struggling to move, as if the ground beneath them had changed, and the humans, who once walked with heads bowed, now moved with purpose, eyes sharp, steps light, and every hand holding something, even if it was only a memory sharpened into a blade. At midnight across the zones, the first strikes began not with fire, but with silence, as power grids fell without warning, and drones dropped from the sky like dead birds, and every screen once filled with commands and warnings now showed only one image, the mark of the new breed carved into the earth itself, a single hand raised not in peace but in promise. The promise was clear: the reckoning had begun. In Zone 7, the command outpost, built with walls of steel and guarded by towers of flame, became a tomb when its gates slammed shut, and the air vents stopped, and the guards screamed into dead radios, and those outside watched in stillness as the structure sank into the ground, pulled by machines long hidden and forgotten, now awakened by those who remembered how to build in silence. In the northern sector, human fighters no longer used stolen weapons. They built their own, shaped from scrap and memory, and powered by tech taken from the fallen, and made better and faster and cleaner. And the Varn, who had once looked down on these tools of war, now feared them, because they could not predict them, and they could not stop them. Ships that once ruled the skies fell in flames as humans launched from hidden silos and broken bunkers, their ships small but fast, and wrapped in the kind of chaos that only comes from desperation, turned to fury, and every crash sent shockwaves, not just through metal, but through the hearts of the invaders, who now wondered if the end was near. In a broadcast sent across every channel, a voice not loud, but steady spoke in a dozen languages old and new: "We do not come to talk, and we do not come to trade. We come for what was taken, and we bring only the truth, that we are not what you thought we were, and we will not stop until every star knows our name." The voice came from someone the Varn had never seen before, a human with eyes like ice and fire, and a face marked by every pain ever suffered, and behind them stood a group not dressed in armor or cloth, but in shadows, shaped by will, and every movement they made spoke one word: enough. The Varn leaders met in secret rooms and argued with shaking hands and dry voices, and some called for retreat and others for more fire, and a few asked the question none dared before: what if we cannot win, and what if they were never weak, only waiting? On the ground, entire units vanished into forests and tunnels and ruins that no longer hid the broken, but protected the strong, and the children of war moved through the world like wind with teeth, and when they struck, they left behind only silence and fear. In one zone, a Varn general begged for support, as his forces were overrun by fighters who never showed their faces and never spoke, only fought with the calm of those who had died once and come back stronger. And when the help arrived, the general was gone, and his banner burned into the ground, with one word below it returned. In orbit, the last command ship received a message sent not from Earth, but from one of their own vessels, now empty and floating with no power. The message showed footage from the lower decks, humans crawling through vents and tunnels, with eyes that glowed in the dark, and the final frame showed the ship's core exposed and waiting. And then the feed ended with a whisper: leave now, or burn with the rest. Panic swept the fleet, and some ships turned away and tried to flee, but found their paths blocked by clouds filled with metal and fire and machines they did not know, machines that once belonged to other species, now flying with human hands and purpose and vengeance. The reckoning was not a battle, it was a storm made of everything. The Varn had ignored the pain they caused the people, they broke the voices they silenced, and now all of it had come back louder than thunder and sharper than steel, and it tore through their walls and their minds with no mercy. In a camp where once humans had been chained and whipped, a group of children stood over their former captors, not with hate in their eyes, but something deeper, something older. And one child asked, "Are we monsters now?" And the oldest among them answered, "No, we are what they made us." And across the world the humans rose, not because they wanted revenge, but because they had become something that could not kneel, something that could not be tamed, something that had tasted death and chosen to return with fire in their bones. The sky turned black with the smoke of falling ships, and the ground cracked with the weight of machines turned against their makers, and the air hummed with songs in old tongues, not of sorrow, but of becoming. And even those who had once doubted now stood with fists clenched and voices raised, not in war cries, but in truth. We are the storm you feared. We are the fire you fed. We are the end of your rule. The reckoning did not come with kings or armies or thrones. It came with hands that built and broke and healed. It came with hearts that would not die and minds that would not forget. And now the galaxy knew. Earth was no longer conquered. Earth was rising. The war was over, but the silence that followed felt heavier than fire as the stars held their breath, and the smoke above Earth began to clear, and the broken towers stood quiet with no voices in the wind, and only the sound of footsteps on ash. The Varn were gone, some fled with torn ships and shattered pride, others were captured, and now sat behind walls made by the same hands they once enslaved, and a few begged for mercy, not knowing if such a thing still existed in the hearts of those they once crushed beneath their boots. No treaty had been signed, no flags had been lowered, no bells had rung, and yet the galaxy knew the truth. Earth was free, but not the Earth they remembered, not the one that had fallen with screams and fire. This Earth had risen different. The humans walked the ruins not with joy but with quiet purpose, and they carried not weapons but memories, and every step they took left behind questions that no alien dared to speak aloud. What are they now? What did they become? What do they want? A prisoner named Volex, once a general among the Varn, sat alone in a stone cell beneath a shattered fortress, and he waited for his punishment, or for his end, or for the silence to take him. But instead a woman came, no weapons, no chains, just eyes like storms, and a voice like wind through mountains. He asked her why they had not killed him, and she did not answer at first, only sat across from him and watched the sky through a broken window. And then she said, "Because you need to see it." He did not understand until days passed, and he saw what she meant. He saw the children rebuilding walls with laughter in their voices, and the old ones planting seeds in cracked soil, and the wounded carrying the weak, with hands once used for fists and blades. He saw humans forgive each other even when they had no reason to do so, and he saw them remember without hate, and build without orders, and speak without fear. And he saw the thing the Varn had never understood, the thing they had never truly seen. They had thought humans were small creatures driven by hunger and war and pride, but now he saw the truth. Humans were not born to destroy, they were born to endure, and every time the world ended they found a way to begin again. The new breed was not a race, it was a choice, and anyone could walk the path, if they carried the fire, if they accepted the pain, if they understood that becoming more means losing what you were. In the high mountains, a group of humans stood at the edge of a cliff, where the first resistance had begun, and they lit a fire that touched the clouds, and one of them spoke to the sky not in rage or pride, but in truth. We are not gods, and we are not monsters. We are the answer to your question. We are what happens when you break something that refuses to stay broken. And across the stars others heard the message not through screens or signals, but through stories, passed from mouth to mouth, from system to system, carried by those who had once feared Earth, and now feared it no more, but respected it in the way one respects a storm. In a council chamber, on a distant world, two leaders of alien nations watched a recording of a human child lifting a fallen beam to save her sister, and one turned to the other and said, "They do not fight like us," and the other replied, "No, they survive." The fear was still there in some corners of the galaxy, not the old fear of weapons or armies, but a new fear of change, of awakening, of the idea that maybe the humans were not the outliers, but the beginning of something new. And others saw hope in that idea, because they too had lived under chains and shadows, and they too had wondered if they were more than what they had been told, and now they had an answer not in books or stars, but in the eyes of a people who had become more. Back on Earth, a monument was built not to heroes or leaders, but to the nameless, to the ones who carried stones, who whispered secrets, who bled in silence, and who never asked to be remembered, but were remembered anyway. The monument was simple, a circle of stone around a tree, and on the tree were marks not in one language, but in many, and they all said the same thing in different ways. We are still here. A child touched the stone and asked her mother what it meant, and the mother smiled and said, "It means we never gave up." In that simple answer was the heart of humanity, not the power, not the fury, not the fire, but the refusal, the quiet, steady refusal to vanish. Even now the humans did not seek to rule or conquer. They sent no fleets into alien skies. They sent voices, hand, stories, and each one carried a piece of the journey, a lesson carved from fire and loss and survival. And some among the stars welcomed them, and others feared them, and a few watched in silence, unsure of what would come next. But the humans knew what came next. They would grow, they would learn, they would rise, and they would never again wait for permission to exist. What humans really are is not a question of muscle or metal or mind. What humans really are is the storm that comes after the fire, the roots that hold after the flood, the voice that whispers after the scream, the breath that returns after the end. They are not perfect, not pure, not peaceful, but they are here, and they are not going anywhere. Not now, not ever.